Okay, so this is to cover the FAQs on RO membranes, because today I've had like 3 different conversations and I've said the same thing to each person. So let's put this into the public domain so you guys can just access it at any point. So firstly, let's talk about what is an RO membrane and where does it fit in the window cleaning industry. An RO is a pre-filter. So a lot of people kind of feel like, or get told you've got to have an RO system because your TDS is over 100 or 150 or 200 or whatever. And so people feel as if the RO membrane is actually the filter, but it's not. It's the pre-filter. If you want ultra pure water for spot-free window cleaning, then it's the DI which is going to give you your spot-free water. It's the final filter. So you never see a window cleaning system that's RO only, even though you can operate them in RO only as a way of saving money. You don't always need DI, but every RO system has DI. And the way an RO membrane works is that you have pressure in front of it and that pressure and no pressure behind it, and so that you have a pressure differential. And the higher the pressure going on this side, then the more water is going to go through the membrane and come out as pure. So what's happening is you're wanting to demineralize the water, and the way you're demineralizing the water is to understand that the holes in the membranes are so small that only H2O will go through, like H2O molecules in theory. And when there's a mineral like a calcium or a magnesium or a nitrate or a sulfate or something like that, then what's happening is it's not just sitting there on its own as a molecule. The water, because of the ionic charge on a calcium, is like 2+, and because of that ionic charge, all these water molecules are clustering around it, and that's what makes it like basically bigger. And so on this pressure side, it pushes that molecule up against the membrane. It can't get through the hole easily. The water is in flow, so you've got a waste pipe, so the water's going out to waste. And so basically the bigger molecules get flushed through the system in real time. RO membranes are usually made for 2 or 3 major industries. Pure water, drinking water. So most of your drinking water, the Coca-Cola brands and all that, they're all RO water. As a rule, even if they say spring water, quite often they're still put through RO, unless you get a mineralized water. All right, that's different. And so the making of potable water or drinkable water is a big part of the industry. Desalination plants, where they're taking seawater and turning it into drinkable water or usable water in a city, is another use of ROs. And then there's a massive industry of the under-sink reverse osmosis purification systems for homes and households. And so what we're going to talk about is the factory rating, what does that mean, and then the application of reverse osmosis technology to window cleaners, to you as a window cleaner. Right, so most of my phone call, well, all 3 of my phone calls this morning were actually in relation to factory ratings. So somebody maybe somewhere in some group somewhere is talking about the factory ratings, and then people contact me and say, well, what are the factory ratings on your membranes? And a factory rating is actually like a laboratory standardized test. It's tested at a certain pressure. It's tested, basically the test is the TDS of the water, the pressure of the water, and the temperature of the water. Now, these are the 3 things that affect the performance of an RO. So when they want to compare 2 membranes, one to the other, then these ratings basically, or measurements, give the rating of the reverse osmosis membrane. So, before, most RO membranes are tested at 150 psi, and now you'll see that there's a whole range of membranes that are tested at 100 psi. And so what does that mean to you? Well, it just says the membranes that are designed to be ultra low pressure, they're called ultra low pressure or ULP, or zero pressure, right? These membranes are designed for a flow rate under low pressure conditions. And zero pressure that doesn't make sense to call it zero pressure, because obviously you need pressure for a reverse osmosis membrane to work. What it's really saying is zero boost. So if you look at those under-sink systems, there's usually a little pump on it. And now the modern ones don't have a pump on it because the membrane is able to be worked with normal tap pressure, 30 psi through to, 100 psi. So how does that affect you as a window cleaner? Well, how many times are you going to be able to say, okay, I have 100 psi or 150 psi, every time I use my my reverse osmosis, system, whether it's ours or somebody else's. So, we don't create constant and predictable conditions, because we go from house to house and commercial building to commercial building, and every job's different. So the rating, and also it's standardized. Like all of the membranes are trying to be, competing with each other under the same conditions, with at least the same performance. So, for example, our force filters, the laboratory test is at 100 psi so that they can have a rating, but you can run them at 150 psi. We actually test them at 150 psi when we're testing flow. So we put the maximum pressure through it to see if there's any leaks or drips or whatever thing like that, because maybe there's a guy out there one day who'll take it out to 150 psi. So, but somebody's going to go to 150 psi if they've got a pump. The highest we've seen from a spigot or a tap is about 120 psi, which is a lot of pressure. So when you're looking at that factory rating, the second thing that they're going to do is tell you the water temperature. So it's 75 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 79 degrees Fahrenheit is 25 degrees centigrade, and that again says that the performance of the membrane is predictable and able to be compared. But the reality is, when you look at your groundwater, right, and remembering it's not the ambient temperature of the air that's deciding the temperature of your water, it's what's going on under the ground. The groundwater is going to vary through the different seasons. And the performance of all RO membranes could be summarized as saying that the performance of the reverse osmosis membrane at 79 degrees Fahrenheit, I think it's 79, but anyway, 25 degrees C, is double what it is at 4 degrees or 39 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you're coming out of winter and the ground is freezing or has been freezing, then the source water for your reverse osmosis membrane is going to have a higher viscosity, so it's going to be thicker, and so therefore the amount of water that's going to go through the membrane is actually going to be less, and so much less that it's half, right? So we often see at the beginning of the season, right, is that you hear of people saying, "Oh, my RO doesn't work," and then over the years I've heard people being told that they've probably fouled it over winter and they'll need to buy new RO membranes. But the reality, in my opinion, whilst I can't say whether they're fouled or not fouled, the reality is, after 8 years in this industry, is that it's the groundwater temperature for the guys who have got those problems are in the north of North America and places like that. And so then you say, well, why doesn't the same happen at the end of the season, so the guy would get an understanding? And that's where I want to talk with you about the ambient temperature versus the groundwater temperature, because the temperature of the air can get cold while a storm comes through, but it takes a long time for that coldness to penetrate the earth to the depth that your water pipes are running at. So as you come into winter, even though the air is cold, the ground is not so cold, so your temperature of the water coming into your system is not so low, so you don't really notice as significantly the drop in performance of the reverse osmosis membrane. So and 25 degrees or 75 degrees Fahrenheit is not a realistic water temperature for us, if you look at all the people all over the world. Now, compare that to Dubai, and in Dubai it's like 50 degrees C, which I've got no idea how much that is, but probably 120 degrees Fahrenheit or something. And so they've got that all year round. So those guys will never have an issue. They'll have maximum performance out of their reverse osmosis membranes on the temperature factor continually. But you get a guy in Buffalo, New York, or in Canada, and they're going to minus 30 up in Canada, some of those guys, Alberta, minus 30, minus 40, and that ground is going really, really cold. So the factory rating on temperature or the factory rating of a membrane is really quite different in its meaning for a guy who's up in the north of North America as compared to a guy who's down in California or Florida, or a guy near the equator, or a guy over in the Middle East or whatever. Okay, so that's temperature. Pressure is the other one. Like these systems, the factory rating is 100 psi or 150 psi, but the reality is that we're not getting consistent water pressure. If we service a house on the top of a hill, the water pressure will be lower than the house in the same street at the bottom of the hill, right? By the nature of the head of gravity, increasing the pressure into the system. So none of that really applies to us. And then the third one is that the TDS in the test is like 750 because there's desalination going on. Well, by the way, the TDS of seawater is 35,000. So sometimes I hear guys going, oh my God, my TDS has gone up to 4, or my TDS is 500, it's really high. And it's really not high for an RO membrane. The other one that we talk about is actually the ratio of pure to waste, right? So a standard, I don't need to care about water, reverse osmosis setup, like a factory setup, would have 50% of the water going to waste, and then they can maximize the performance of the reverse osmosis membrane. Now, RO membranes are intended to reduce the cost of purification of water. So over the years, they've gone from 95%, what's called the rejection rate, like the percentage of the minerals that are in the water that are going through to waste, to 98%, to 98.9, maybe 99% of the minerals are going through to waste. But in order to achieve that, you have to have maximum pressure, and you've got to have maximum pressure, and you've got to have something else. So the higher the pressure, the higher the rejection rate, right? So if you can boost the pressure into an RO membrane without exceeding the pressure rating of the housing, then you can have the maximum rejection rate. However, that's the other part, is going through the percentage of water going to waste. So when we're window cleaners, in my opinion, and the forced filters that we have them modified by the factory to suit what I believe is more important is the flow rate. So I'm not interested in 99% rejection, because the cost of removing the 1%, 2%, 3% of minerals with the fourth filter, which is your DI filter, is like insignificant compared to the income that you can earn if you've got enough water, right? So you use more water, we'll use a higher flow rate, and you'll use much less time. And in fact, if you know the reach it technique, then you can actually use less water volume if you're using a higher flow rate for much less time, okay? So sometimes guys see our brushes and go, oh, you must be using so much water. No, in the job, like, we can be down at less than a litre or a quarter of a gallon per window if the guy uses the right technique and the right brush for the agitation. Okay. So as a window cleaner, we know that the temperature is going to change the performance of the RO, we know the pressure is going to change the performance of the RO, and we know the ratio of water going to waste. So if you look at, like, for example, flow red, we preset that at about 65 to 70% of water to pure and 30 to 35% of water to waste. That changes with the pressure, so we've just got a range. And the performance of the membrane performs better with higher pressure. So if you say, I've got 200 in, I've got 10 coming out, but at 30 psi, you might have 200 in and 5 coming out at 100 psi. And so I hope that what you can see by now is the factory rating is not really relevant to you as a window cleaner. You shouldn't be making your decision on which membrane you're going to buy. As long as you're buying ultra low pressure from Axion, or you're buying zero pressure, or like ours are zero pressure. So ours are the latest technology. And the difference between ours and others is that we're not trying to get 99% rejection, we're trying to get a higher flow rate. So we actually have the internal piping. The membrane's the same. We don't touch the membrane, but the way we deal with how that water gets distributed to the membrane, that's the piece that we adjust. The second thing, like if you go back 2 or 3 years, then even though a membrane might cost me $100, they were being sold for $600, right? So now you'll see everybody competing, and the cost of membranes has come down under 300, 250, 200, right? So the implications, or how much you have to protect or defend or look after an RO membrane so that you don't get the $600 cost has just been cut in a third. So we know that, whilst a membrane might last 5 years, if you've got 50% of the water to waste, it might last 2 years with 30% of the water to waste. Not in all cases, it's only in the really, really high TDS areas. Then we don't mind that. If it's $100 a year and you can save $1,000 on DI resin or $2,000 on DI resin, then it's doing its job and are easy to replace and are cheap to replace. And so it's the most important thing is not how much is my water costing to make. Most important thing is how much money can I make, right? So it's all about you being faster, better, safer, and not having you. Don't focus on the pennies when you can make the bucks. Do you know what I mean? Pennies. I don't know. Yep. So the other thing I think was RO is at what point. Some people ask me a lot about when do I need an RO, and I would suggest to you is that if your DI consumption is over $1,000, $1,500 a year, then that $1,000 to $1,500 a year would be cut back to $100, $150 a year if you're using an RO membrane system. So you can actually get a return on investment, but RO is purely a business decision. It's not my TDS is 250, you need an RO. No, you don't, right? And I'll show you that you can use a different method and save that money. Because if you're only cleaning one house a week with your pure water system, or you're a pressure washer or somebody like that who's just using it for an add-on service, you've already soft washed or pressure washed a house, and you just want to add window cleaning as a spot-free window cleaning service, then the idea of spending $2,000 on a pure water system so that you can use it for 15 minutes on a house after a job and you're going to use it every second or third day, to me doesn't make sense. In that case, you should stay with DI resin. If your TDS is high, let's say it's over 100, 150, something like that, then you could go to what we call the pressure washer method or the drive-through car wash method. And the drive-through car wash method just simply says, when you go through a drive-through car wash, they wash your car with brushes and tap water. And then you pay that extra buck at the end and you get the spot-free rinse. So you can do the same with DI tanks. You can say, okay, I'm going to do all the frames and I'll do the windows as a window cleaner. I'll do it all with the tap water, right? That's where the time is, that's where the volume is. And then, of course, I'm going to leave tap water on the window, and that tap water is going to evaporate, and it's going to leave the minerals that are in your tap water on the glass, so we want to get those spots off. And that's why we developed Check It, like the TDS meter that fits just under the brush. So if you are using this method, you can flush your tubes. You know with Check It that the water coming through to the brush is now spot-free, like TDS 000. And you can then just go with the Reach It technique, just, in 3 passes, 5 to 10 seconds, you can polish the spots that would be left on the glass from the tap water off. And the last thing on the glass is your DI water, so you have a spot-free finish. So it might sound like 2-stage and it might sound like more work, but actually it's incredibly fast. And then your savings on DI resin are real. Now, if you find that your time is gold to you and you want to use DI only and you start using $50 a week and you've got a 40-week season, then you're going to be using $2,000 a year, then you can say, okay, I can justify, from a business perspective, I can justify buying an RO membrane, or an RO membrane system, of course. Okay, so I think that gives you a lot of the insights, and these are the questions we get asked on a continual basis. If there are any other questions that you have, please fire them back at us, because this method of transferring what I know, from a manufacturing point of view and as a customer service guy, looking after and answering all the questions and inquiries from window cleaners and pressure washers around the world, we're going to make a series of these videos that'll get those answers out there. So if there's something that you're thinking about, reverse osmosis, that hasn't been covered here, then fire it back at us somewhere. You can find me on Facebook as facebook.com/perry.tate, T-A-I-T, or you can fire an email to support@futureofcleaning.com. And if you're interested in buying an RO system for pure water for window cleaning, or if you're looking to replace your membranes, you can find our solutions at www.futureofcleaning.com. Let's summarize it with this. The focus of Reach It and your focus should be to clean windows faster, better, safer. right? So when you're making these decisions, what you're looking for is RO membranes that are designed to have a higher flow rate, right, rather than a higher rejection rate. Because if you have more water and you've got that water coming out of a brush and the water's is where you need it, and you can do an on-glass rinse with spot-free water, then and only then you'll be cleaning windows faster, better, safer. Faster, better, safer.